All right. Well, welcome to the Experience Better video podcast series. We're back, Adam. So again, I'm Josh Beekler, a PT.
Adam Lee's a PT as well. It's been a little bit of a hiatus.
A little bit with all of the COVID pandemic and everything. Just trying to sort through all that needs to be sorted through, and took a short break, but we're back, and we'll be providing videos again and at a safe social distance, 6 feet from each other, and doing all the appropriate things. So let's dive in. So let's talk about like shoulder pain.
Yep.
So what are you thinking?
So I don't know. We were just talking, a little bit yesterday. Like, hey, you come into the clinic or your shoulder starts to bother you. Now that sports are starting to get ramped up, you have little kid baseball that was able to start practicing.
And everybody's been doing nothing for the last 3 months.
Exactly. And so the gyms are starting to open back up, and it's like, hey, what's a common problem that people could potentially run into, and it's shoulder pain.
Yep.
Everyone's had their shoulder start bothering them at some point.
Right.
And so I just want to give a brief overview today of like, hey, my shoulder hurts here, like what could it possibly be?
Sure. Yep.
And so we're just going to start with the front of the shoulder. And so if you're having pinpoint pain right on the front side of your shoulder, there's a little stringy thing right there on the front of your shoulder called the biceps tendon. And so if you were doing a lot of like heavy lifting, like say you were helping a buddy move, and you're lifting a lot of heavy boxes, couches, furniture, that type of stuff, and you wake up the next morning and you're like, golly, man, my shoulder just hurts right on the front side. Nothing on the top, nothing on the side, nothing on the back.
Right.
It could potentially be biceps tendonitis. And so that's just an overuse injury. The biceps muscle, the muscle on the front of your forearm or front of your upper arm, inserts right there on the front portion of the shoulder.
Right.
And so that can get aggravated. It kind of starts to peel away. You get a little bit of micro tear, and then it's just tendonitis, which is an overuse condition of that tendon. It could also potentially be a SLAP tear, which stands for superior labrum anterior to posterior tear. So there's they picture it as a clock, and so the labrum is a portion of your shoulder that provides depth to the shoulder socket. And so if you think of it like an anatomy standpoint, it would be like the T if a golf ball was sitting on the T, with the golf ball being your arm and the head of the humerus. The T would be like the labrum.
Sure.
And so it's not a very big structure, but it helps provide a little bit of depth, a little bit of anatomical stability. And so that biceps tendon that we just got done talking about, that inserts right on the front portion of the labrum.
Right.
And so it can peel that labrum back. And there's like 10 different types of labral tears.
Sure.
But some of the more common ones involve the biceps tendon either peeling that labrum back or even detaching from the labrum itself. And so you think of it as a clock, and so 12 o'clock being the top portion, 6 o'clock being the bottom portion. We think of a SLAP tear as the 10 to 2 tear, typically. And then there's other types of tears that involve the bottom portion that aren't quite as common. But these ones are involved heavy lifting, repetitive lifting, so maybe, you typically see these in the younger population, so like that 15 to 30-ish age group. Typically most people, as they get up in age, they're probably going to rupture their bicep as opposed to have a labral tear. But that age group, you see it a lot in pitchers because you're getting that maximum external rotation, which you can tell I'm not a pitcher because my arm stops here. But there's just that force, repetitive force at that labrum that's always constantly peeling it. And it's just, when you're throwing a 100-mile-an-hour fastball like they are in the majors or in college baseball, that it's just right below that threshold where it's going to tear every single time.
Well, even a 13, 14-year-old, again, like I said, they haven't been doing anything for a while, and now we're getting right back into organized sports again, and kids are going out and throwing a bunch of balls and showing their friends how fast they can, how hard and fast they can throw it. Certainly is a recipe for
potential
anything like this.
So those are two really common things on the front. Another thing that's on the front is what's called impingement syndrome. And so what that is there's not a whole lot of space in between the structures in your shoulder, like the actual joint, the ball of the joint, and then the acromion process, which is your clavicle, or your, where your clavicle comes and meets your shoulder blade. There's a little projection on the front. And so there's about 10 to 15 millimeters of space, so not much. So we're talking about half an inch of space on a normal person. And so sometimes as you get, repetitive overhead, or just a random thing pops up where you strain a tendon or you have a little bit of damage inside the joint, there's swelling. Well, now it compresses that space, it puts pressure on the tendons. So this is typically seen when you get up overhead. You're like right to about 120 degrees and it starts to pinch, or it starts to feel like a sharp pain.
Yep.
It might do it when you cross your body, or if you like are reaching, trying to scratch your back or wash your back or something like that in the shower. And so that's something that could potentially be an issue there as well, as just shoulder impingement. So those things are the three most common things that we see on the front.
And impingement a lot of times can be from a muscle imbalance too, where you don't have the, because your shoulder blade actually attaches to that acromion process. So if you're somebody who's rounded shouldered on your computer all day and you don't have those strong muscles in your middle back, your shoulder blade can actually round, and that even reduces that space even more. So just some simple exercises and knowing what to do can really open up that space a little bit.
Absolutely. Posture is huge with shoulder impingement. It's
usually how about the back of the shoulder then?
So the back of the shoulder, if you're having like pain like over the shoulder blade area and on the back side of the shoulder, something that we think of is a rotator cuff injury, whether that's a tear or just like a strain of the muscle. And so with that, typically it's a little bit older. You might see like a rotator cuff tendinitis in younger individuals, but typically you're not having a big tear. That's usually as we age. Our posture kind of starts to get a little bit diminished. We aren't as strong as we once were. And so the rotator cuff, its main job is to provide the dynamic stability of that shoulder. Because like I mentioned earlier, the anatomy, it's like a golf ball sitting on a tee, so if you move it, that golf ball is going to fall right out. So shoulder relies really heavily on the rotator cuff and then what we call the scapular stabilization muscles for stability. And so you can get a tear, so something like a fall on an outstretched arm, you're walking your dog, you trip over a sidewalk crack, put your arm out, just that force there where it tries to stabilize, sometimes that can lead to a tear. That, or carpenters or construction workers where it's a lot of overhead, like using a hammer or just heavy lifting, drywallers, that type of stuff, just repetitive overuse. And so we typically see these 40 to 60-ish. And so that's kind of the normal age where you see these most commonly. You can obviously get them younger or older, but another kind of weird thing with a rotator cuff tear is a lot of times people get nighttime pain. It's just like a dull ache on the outside of your shoulder.
I hear that a lot.
And so it's just kind of an unusual thing, and that's called a referred pain, where there's nothing necessarily wrong with the outside of your shoulder. It's coming from the rotator cuff, which is on the back.
Exactly.
But that's where it represents, or that's where your brain interprets it as coming.
Right. Exactly.
So other things, just a muscle imbalance, like posture, like we talked about, there can present with pain all over the place. If you have abnormal movement patterns with your shoulder blade, you can have excessive winging, which sets you up for just mechanical faults. So there's a lot of things that could be wrong, and these are just, obviously a brief overview. We're not trying to diagnose something via a webcam.
Give you some options of what
some
different
potential
things could be.
Absolutely. So if you're one that likes to go to Dr. Google and say, hey, these are my symptoms, and you can kind of differentiate before you go seek professional help, whether it's coming to a PT or a doctor.
Very good. Well, how are the boys doing at home? They're getting along well?
They're doing all right.
It's been everybody crazy?
Yeah. My wife's a teacher, and so she's been off work since the middle of March. So her patience is running a little bit thin with them, but we got a 2.5-year-old and a 15-month-old at home.
And then you.
And then me, exactly. So a grown adult child.
Right.
But with the parks not being open, Noah always wants to go to the parks and go down the slides, play on the swings, and hopefully we'll get all that stuff open up here soon. What about you with the little guy?
We're in the same boat. You got a 6-month-old that's wearing 18-month-old clothes and looks like Michelin Man right now. So he's eating us out of the house. So a lot of fun.
Yep.
So
good times.
Which he'll make a return to this podcast, I think, at some point. He's doing a lot more than he was at that 2-month video.
Sure.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. It's good to be back, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you.